Welcome to Circuosity.21. I'm Jim Strader-Sasser, and I'm one of your hosts. I'm here today with my podcast and life companion, the Reverend Dr. Hal, or Howie Sasser, and together we're delighted that you are joining us. Circuosity.21 is our pulpit for exploring ancient and contemporary spiritual and moral themes. We engage topics with curiosity. We honor wisdom we have received from sages, prophets, martyrs, and saints from millennia ago. We enjoy learning from our friends, listeners, and especially from teachers who help us understand life better. One of our objectives as Episcopal priest is to become more spiritually alive while living more joyously and sharing what we learn with you. So welcome to our pilgrimage, and thank you for traveling along with us. Today is episode 6 of our series on the Beatitudes for the 21st century. We are pleased to have one of the bright and shining stars who is a sacramental leader in the Episcopal Church throughout the world. The Right Reverend Caryle Hughes is the diocesan bishop of the Diocese of Newark in New Jersey. She is a former colleague in ministry with Howie, and so today Howie will lead this discussion on Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. So thank you for joining us, and offer a prayer as we begin.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You're looking all official, and here we are in our summer costumes.
Listen, I go from now until 9:30 tonight, and it's all official today. So, I just get dressed once. I don't keep changing.
Poor thing, what a busy day.
It's just the way life is.
So what is that day in the life of Bishop Hughes like? What all is on your agenda for this warm day in July?
So back-to-back Zooms for meetings, and we've just restarted confirmation. So confirmation's happening again tonight. So that's also a very exciting thing to have those happening again.
Is it a big number?
We'll have about 170 people in 8 services being confirmed, received, or reaffirming vows.
Wow.
8 services concurrently?
No, there's 8 services between this month and next month. So
wow.
2 this week, 2 next week. I think we have a week off, another 2. So
Wow.
make it up for a long time. These people have waited a long time.
Do you do a little slap on the cheek, or do you do some other sort of thing?
Oh, I just lay my hands on and say the prayer. I've not ever seen the whole slap on the cheek thing. I feel like it's an urban legend.
I got it. I got hit in the side of the head with a ring.
Oh my, I can't even imagine.
That's how I turned out this way.
Yeah, and I was confirmed at 11, and that wasn't happening then. So that's over 50 years ago. I'm much more committed to making sure that people realize that confirmation is the start, not the end.
Yeah.
So most of our night is about that. But hey.
It's so true.
Good morning good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're joining us for this podcast. This is once again the series on the Beatitudes. I am one of your hosts, Howie Sasser.
And I'm Jim Strader-Sasser.
And this morning, or this afternoon, we're recording in the morning, we have with us a special guest, Bishop Caryle Hughes, the Bishop of Newark in New Jersey. Now that I live in Newark, Delaware, I've had to learn to pronounce it both ways and be careful which one I choose. She has been very important in my formation as a priest. She was my first boss. Every Sunday, I find myself doing things thinking, oh, I know where I learned that. So I'm very, very pleased to be back talking with her again. She has been a priest in a couple of places, is now a bishop, and I think before I make any mistakes in talking about her history, I will instead ask you, Carly, to tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are now.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be part of your discussion. It's always it's fun to get to spend time with you. And I think of you as the gift that came as the answer to my prayer. And I was at St. Peter's Church, and I remember standing in the nave one day saying to God, I can't do it alone. I need help. And I think a week or two later, you stopped in. So I grew up in the Episcopal Church, and it's always been my brand. I haven't been anything else, which sometimes I think makes me boring in the Episcopal Church. But the thing that I'm keenly aware of is because of where I grew up and how I grew up. I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, in the 1960s and 70s, and that was a very segregated time in Fort Worth. I think that city is a little less segregated. It's still very much separated by color of skin, but not the level of segregation that there was when I grew up. So there really were Black and white churches. And if you were the wrong color in the wrong church, you would be steered gently over to the right church. I had no experience of the white church at all. I only had experience of the Black church in a Black neighborhood in the 1960s. So I saw a lot of church. We go to our church in the mornings, and then all of our friends were headed back to their church. So the Baptists were going all day long. So we would head out to their churches. So I grew up hearing all of their songs and hearing their preachers. And then we had a good girlfriend in the summer, my sister and I, who visited, that her family was holiness. So we would go to the Holy Roller Church with them. So kind of a wide variety of experience, even though I have been in this denomination most of my life. I am a second career cleric. My first career was in training and development. And I used to say while I was in seminary and right as I was starting out, same job, different boss. I spent all of my time talking with people about how to talk to people and how to have a life that made sense. It was not unusual for people to come into my office and want a prayer. The word was out there and I didn't realize it was, but I remember someone coming into my office. I was also the last stop if people were about to lose their jobs in management track. And if I couldn't help them figure it out in some sort of training and development way, then that was kind of the end of the line. I remember one guy who just seemed incredibly hopeless, no matter how much work we did, finally saying to me, everybody told me that if it was just a complete mess and I could get nowhere, that you would say a prayer and give me a Bible. How come you haven't done that? That's when I discovered I had a reputation that was beyond training and development. So then I've been in the church as an ordained person since 2005 and have been in parish ministry for the bulk of that time. Love parish ministry. And the last church was back in Fort Worth, the town where I grew up. I live next door to my parents and plan to retire from there. And as often is the case, as soon as we have a good solid plan, God steps in and starts shaking things up again. And I found myself now serving in the Diocese of Newark. So never ever saw that one coming, but most of my ministry is like that. Never ever saw it coming. So, and it's all been a delight. There've always been those delightful surprises, like the day that you walked into St. Peter's and wanted to stay. That was a blessing. Oh my goodness. I think it kept me sane. And it certainly was a gift to the whole church.
Thank you. Thank God.
Yes.
In the midst of all of those wonderful life events, and as we continue conversation around blessing and every one of our guests' understanding of that, can you recall a moment or two in your experience where you felt exceptionally blessed? And apparently, Howie's walking in the door might have been one, but maybe there's another.
Absolutely. I often talk about the Sisters of Mary Namur, and if there was an experience that I had really and truly of not so much the white church, but a white religious, it was through the Sisters of Mary Namur. When my family moved to Fort Worth, I was 5 years old. I had just finished kindergarten, and I entered first grade already reading at the first grade level. So one would have thought that I would have left first grade reading at second grade level or potentially third grade level, just because I was clearly a reader. That's what I did. Not an athletic bone in my body. I read. That was my thing. My reading level stayed the same in the first grade. And Fort Worth schools were segregated, and they were most definitely not equal. And they were unequal in a way that they had not been in the school that I attended in Tulsa. So there was a big drop in my learning. It was almost like kind of maintaining status quo. I came in with something, I kept what I had, I didn't lose what I had, but I gained nothing. And the teacher talked with my parents and said, you have got to do something. She's going to start losing ground in this school. And at that point, actually before then, those sisters had moved to Fort Worth specifically to integrate a school, to start education and offer it to any student of any color and any ethnicity and any religious background that wanted to come. That's what they felt called to do. I always think what an extraordinary thing to feel called to do something like that in the state of Texas. With the level of segregation. And, I remember, I don't spend a lot of time managing other people's denominations or thinking about their denominations, but I can remember a few years back when there was this incredible pressure from Rome being put on the American sisters. And I remember thinking, oh, they need to be careful with the Sisters of Mary Namur, because those ladies stood toe to toe with the Klan in Texas. And they came out ahead, because I look at people like me, a whole generation of us that are incredibly grateful for them, that started life with a very strong foundation educationally that was simply not available to us any other way. So what a gift, what a blessing, what a gift that keeps on giving.
I wonder, is this a story that you have read often? Is it a story that has influenced your ministry? Do you have an overall opinion of this piece of Jesus' teaching as far as its value to you and to the church?
I think I probably approach it as often as most Episcopalians do. I think of myself as a pretty average Episcopalian. I'm pretty middle of the road. I approach things with a real desire to understand what God wants of me, wants of us. Some things catch my attention more and I stay with them, and some things do not. And I'm keenly aware, thinking on this intentionally, that the Beatitudes are really something I don't hear people talk about very often, and that I don't talk about very often. Occasionally I do, but I don't talk about them very often. And I've been wondering about that. I wonder if, I'm aware that a very clear conversation with a parishioner who decided to leave church because Luke's version, the blessings and woes, a parishioner hearing those words and then hearing me preach on them, and it turns out it's the first time he'd ever heard those words. Or the first time he remembered ever hearing them, and he was convinced I was making them up. That they did not exist in the Bible. God would never say woe to you, ever. God would only say blessing. And how dare I use that kind of language with a congregation? Because God wouldn't use it. What would give me the right? To sit in that place of discomfort is really hard, and it's hard to learn from. The thing that I also have been thinking about in terms of the Beatitudes, just as just in thinking about them for this discussion, is I'm really aware how many times in the last few weeks, and this really is kind of a moving into this transition period of COVID. But when we were in the absolute worst of it, I think we just had to pay attention. We had to focus. We had to pull ourselves together. But now that that kind of pressure is off and we're trying to figure out what works and doesn't work, who is it that we need to take care of? Do mask on, not on? What behavior is acceptable? What behavior isn't acceptable? That in the midst of figuring all that out, we also have this kind of upwelling of all the emotion that we couldn't deal with, or that had to be suppressed or had to be bypassed. So at a time where I think we should just feel this great sense of relief, we're actually feeling grief, or we're feeling angry, or we're feeling frustrated, and we're feeling incredibly judgmental of other people. And I find myself saying over and over and over, will the adult Christians please enter the room and begin to speak? And those who cannot identify as adult Christians, please sit down and let the adult Christians have the conversation. The Beatitudes in particular, that it really can help people, I think, sort themselves in terms of having an adult Christian response. But incredibly complicated times, to confusing times where, we don't know what the answer is. I genuinely thought by now, though, just looking at things logically and how it worked once we got to that kind of 50% vaccinated point, that and then what that did to us in terms of we're color coded in terms of, I say all this to say that I think all that we have used to kind of manage our lives and manage our spiritual lives and manage church has been based on our ability to control in this kind of basic sense that God is there to heal and bring peace. And if we kind of go and receive God's healing and God's peace on a weekly basis and continue to manage our life, we'll be in good shape. And all of that has been blown out of the water. And I'm not saying that God isn't going to give healing or peace, but I am saying the adult Christians need to step into the room. And for many of us, that means figuring out what is that to be an adult Christian? What is the work that I do in order to be an adult Christian? And I think the Beatitudes give people something to work with. I don't think it's the only thing to work with, but I think it gives them something to work with. And it strikes me that we've got the 10 Commandments. We've got the greatest commandment. We have the Beatitude. As Episcopalians, we have the baptismal covenant. That these things all work in a complementary way with each other. The average Christian needs all of it. All of it. And not simply this a kind of polite receiving of peace or a polite receiving of healing, but we need that kind of radical reshaping that comes when we're actually trying to walk in that way that Jesus laid out so clearly, and laid out not only for the disciples, but laid out for everybody who was listening, including us.
The language around being an adult Christian, and I really like that. And when you mentioned the gentleman who left church because God would never say woe unto you, I just think about, Jesus had a fair amount to say to people who he viewed to be hypocritical, and who said one thing and did another. Yeah, a God who calls people to be prophetic, a God who calls people to seek after peace, a God who challenges people to be reviled in Christ's name. That's a God, that's a difficult God to live with at times, but that is a God that's being expressed, I believe, in this particular text.
Yeah, well, and I feel like it's the thing that I offer to Christians all the time is it's truth in advertising. Jesus never faked us out. Else, he's really upfront, really and truly upfront. Deny yourself, pick up your cross, follow me, feed my sheep. That there's a greatest commandment. Pray for what you need. I will be with you always, but I'm sending you out of here. No, I'll be with you out there, but you got to go. So, I mean, it's all pretty straight up and straightforward, but I think just our practice, for many reasons, more reasons than I will ever truly understand. I think I understand kind of my own lane best, and I might project that onto people. But like I said, I think I'm very much an average product of the average Episcopal church. And so I kind of know this lane of the Episcopal world pretty well, and how our parishioners take things in, and what they hear. And that's why, I say that I think this is an important thing to hold up for people, especially right now, is I think that the time that we have been has been so pressureful that our folks also, in addition to all that other stuff that's welling up, they're in the tenderest place that they have ever been, because there's this incredible place of vulnerability. But I think when we're in that place of vulnerability, that's where God really can make inroads with us. So to have something that we're able to hold on to, that this is what blessed is, that there is more to, I talk with people all the time that there's this peace, and I guess it's my version of talking about Bonhoeffer's cheap grace. There's this peace that I always hear people talk about. I come to church so I can get my peace and have it to take with me to the week, and then by the next Sunday I need more. Well, that there's this peace, this incredible sense of peace, and I think that's what we get in terms of thinking of blessed, and blessed are they who, that we hear over and over, that mantra in the Beatitudes, that sense of blessedness and that sense of peace comes from this deep, deep inner knowing of who God is, and that God knows you. That's a peace that doesn't run out 6 days later, and that you got to pick up more supply every seventh day. Go to church, go as often as you can. But if our goal in going to church is a fill up of the peace that ran out from last week, then I think we've got to take a look at that. Is that ever what Jesus had in mind? What was it in the look that made them hear those words and go? There had to be something, that some piece of being known, and something that a person wanted more of for whatever reason, in that deep, deep, deep connection that seemed to have happened in those moments where Jesus stood with them as they were fishing, or sat with them as they were eating, and then said, "Follow me." And they went. And it strikes me that for us, that our experience on Sundays, our experience in worship together has the opportunity to be that. But if what we do is take it as that's my time, if we diminish it down to a place that we want to name it and claim it and keep it in that little framework, then that's what we have. And we miss that greater opportunity.
That actually leads toward one of the questions I've been asking in all of these things. The idea that what you're beginning with, the idea that it's not the rest stop on Sunday where we're picking up something that we're supposed to use, but rather an awareness. I've been fascinated to ask people whether they thought Jesus was being prescriptive or descriptive. Was he telling people what to do, or was he telling people who they were? And in a way, if your awareness of who you are is your awareness, that transcends anything that you might do or not do, because there's nothing you can do to earn the love of God.
Right.
So the idea that blessed are the peacemakers, it might be tempting to some people to think, okay, now I have to go make peace in order to store up a little bit more in the heavenly bank. But if, on the other hand, you're being told that you are a bearer of peace simply by your existence, that's a completely different message.
Yeah, and I think we forget. I'm really aware of just like of these odd things that I've experienced. I've lost count of the number of people 13, 14, 15 years old that have turned up at church and walked in the door, found me. And you know how hard that is for somebody who's 13, 14, 15 years old, show up at church by yourself, go talk to the priest. They don't even know what to call me because most of them have not ever been in church before. And all of them say something that sounds like this: I know I was baptized. I think something else is supposed to happen at this age. Can you help me with that? How in the world do they know that? In a completely unchurched home, they're not seeing any kind of rite of passage service, because I always thought, well, they must have really good Jewish friends. But once I get into conversations with them, I realize that's not it either. They haven't seen any rite of passage services, but there's something in them that knows who they're called to be, and they don't quite have a name for it, and they don't know what you're supposed to do with all of that. And the only information that they have is that they've been baptized in a Christian church. I look at that when, let me tell one more little story. There's this great scene in the movie The Help. It is the maid who is about to get fired. Viola Davis plays that part. And she's about to get fired. And she is truly the mother figure to the young child in that household. The girl's own mother is portrayed as someone who really is not that overly involved in her child's life. She's very angry at the maid for whatever it is she has done. She fires her. And on the way out the door, Viola Davis sits with the little girl and says, "You is good, you is kind, you is beautiful," and makes her repeat all of those things. When I hear the Beatitudes, that's what I hear. I hear Jesus telling people, this is who you are. And I think this is part of the role of the church, is to tell people, this is who you are. This is who God has called you to be. Now, you may not know how to do that right now, but this is your DNA. This is who, when God called you into being and said, wow, this is very good, that God called all of those things into being too. And I think that we, in order to kind of be that adult Christian, we get to the place where we go, right, I am a peacemaker. Right, I am merciful.
on the one hand, if I was going to kind of put myself in that crowd, I could say, whoa, that's cool. I have a younger brother that maybe he'll be able to heal, or there's an attraction because he's doing things that are truly miraculous. And then yet I think about like the person you mentioned, the young teenager who shows up, who knows something's supposed to happen. And so perhaps there are some followers who are following because there's a simple fix here, or a hopeful fix. And then there perhaps are others that are truly called to follow, and they have a deep sense of knowing around that particular form of call.
Yeah.
That happened in Peekskill. I recall the two sisters who came to the St. Peter's, who came alone and came because they had had a bad experience in another church. And it wasn't like they were looking for anything other than to be who they were supposed to be.
Yes, absolutely. And it's this, the church, when she's at her best, I think has the ability to help people discover who they are as God's own and who God has created them to be and how to live that way in the world. But there are things that I'm called into doing. There are things that I'm called into being. I think our gifts are so specific and unique that there really is something that no one else will do quite the way we will do it, but that we have our own unique path and the unique things that we are meant to do and created to do, and that when we don't do them, we're deeply dissatisfied. We're full of resentment, full of blame, or we work at a real diminished level of who we are.
What do you say to somebody who reads the list and says, I feel less blessed because I qualify under fewer categories?
I've always been aware, not always, I guess I learned this somewhere in my 30s or 40s. So that meant somebody older had to teach it to me. We don't all have the same blessings. We all have very different blessings. There's parts of that are actually mysterious that I won't really understand ever. Why I have a blessing that I feel like I don't really actually even need and somebody else doesn't, that it all seems so capricious. So, I mean, there's that kind of very practical sense of why do some of us have something and others don't have things? While we are created in God's image, we are not God. And it takes a complement of us to make a whole, that no one of us makes the whole. And is it possible that some of us are more blessed with one or another attribute because that particular gift coming from that particular person, a greater need or a more wide-ranging impact? I don't know. It doesn't strike me as unusual that some would look at that list of the Beatitudes and say, these are the parts that just seem that I work in these lanes already with great ease, and these are the parts that are more difficult for me. And I think when we look at things that are difficult for us, and I would say that there are some things that are always difficult for us, kind of across the board, that we can choose to ask for God's help with that. We can choose to do work with that. And I think that's where we go back to Jesus' teaching again and see, all right, what does he say about that particular thing?
I think one of the things that you have to do in terms of being a bishop and determining gifts that a person has, and it's one of the unique parts of authority that you have in the episcopate, is that you lay hands on people who have gone through a process of feeling and believing that they are called, and the church that supports them believes that they are called, and ultimately the diocese supports them. And so how has that played out for you in your ministry as someone who maybe had someone walk in the door when you were a parish priest and say, Carly, I think I'm called to X. How does this sense of call play itself out in that ordination process, if you will, and the development of talents?
Now, I'm not sure that it really has changed all that much from being a parish priest to being a bishop, that I'm asking the same kinds of questions about why a person feels called or how they feel called, and what is it that they feel called to. That, I think, is probably the most key question. What is it that they feel called to? If there's a place of real need in, certainly in this diocese, but I think in our whole church, we use that word discernment to talk about ordination, to talk about deacons and priests and bishops. And that word discernment is really important for a whole lot of things. I think we should be using the word discernment with teenagers as they're thinking about heading to college, or do I take a gap year? That we should be using the word discernment when people are thinking about getting married, not when they've already gotten engaged, but when they're thinking about what's it like to be a married person. We have put it in this kind of revered place around ordination, and because Episcopalians love their clergy. Something I love my priest growing up. I still remember hearing my little brother running through the house saying, God is here, when our priest would come to visit. And then certainly my experience as a priest and as a bishop, I feel like in general, by and large, Episcopalians really do give us a break. They recognize it's a tough job, recognize the fact that even Jesus wouldn't make it in our churches sometimes because we're so demanding. We have this special relationship with clergy, and therefore when we say discernment is something that we do for clergy, then what we've done is miss this opportunity to help people determine how they are called to serve, what their ministry is in the world. That's how the world gets changed. That's our job, to help people think these things through. How do I take my faith into the workplace with me? What does that mean to be an adult Christian working? What does that mean to be that person? I can truthfully say most of the people who have talked with me about feeling called to ordained ministry, after much conversation, have decided that was not the calling at all. But they were called to do something very specific, and it gave them an opportunity to start thinking about that. That mechanism of how we create a place for regular discernment for people of how do I do ministry in the world? These are faithful people that really want to take everything that they're learning and all the ways that they're growing spiritually. How do I then take that out into the world?
I think all of us need to be asking ourselves, why am I on the planet at this moment in human history? Not what job I'm supposed to be doing or what person I'm supposed to be married to, but what is it that I possess based upon the experiences I've had, however young, old, or in between I am, the color of my skin, my sexual orientation. God places us in human history to accomplish the work, and at least from a Christian perspective, to raise up the kingdom of God. And I would say, at least from my perspective, that's an adult Christian perspective. To really strive to figure out, why am I here? And who do I need to align with? And where do we go? And what do we do? That feels like discipleship to me.
Yes, it is, absolutely. People ask me all the time what my vision is for the diocese. And there's two answers to that. One, the diocese and I are determining what the vision is for the diocese. I've not ever been one that believes that there is a person that's got the vision that moves it forward. There was a time in history when that worked. But right now, what that means is every time the person who makes that determination leaves, then the organization is stuck. They no longer have anything that moves them forward. But if it comes organically from them, it takes some encouragement to make that happen. We can make it happen. That is my kind of standard answer. But there is an overriding answer in terms of what motivates me as a person. It's always been the same thing. It has not ever gone away. It's very simple. We are called to change the world. My job is to help people figure out what they are to do so they can live in that call to change the world. We have been sent from the beginning. From the beginning, it's been that simple. We have been sent. We have just gotten ourselves very caught up with taking care of ourselves.
So in your opening words, you talked about a blessed moment of some Christians who blessed you. And as I was thinking about that relative to today's topic, they were not pitiful, they were merciful. And I think there's a distinction between those two words. And so as we kind of move into discussing mercy a bit and how it plays itself out, that was a merciful act, but it also was an act in a broader landscape of justice.
Texas schools were not integrated. Brown had come and gone. They were integrated forcefully by federal mandate later on, but they did not choose to integrate. Here were these sisters doing this work. So it really is a way to look at mercy as being something more than I think we often call it as church people. If I had to be in the kind of catch-up class or remedial class, I would have been not only, one of the handful of Black girls that were there, but I would have been the tallest one. I would have stood out to everybody. I already did because I was so tall. I already did. They were able to catch me up and move me forward, just built into the regular day. And I don't think people, except second grade school teachers, I don't think people realize the incredible compassion that took. And I can genuinely say when I look backwards, that there was not ever in my time in grade school, there was not ever a time where children were sent off to their own special kind of catch-up remedial section. That this was how these sisters operated. They were going to do whatever it took. If it meant they were sending homework home for you, if you were doing something special while everybody else was doing something else, there was no fuss, no muss, no special attention called to it. Everybody simply got the work done. And I think this is the biggest part of mercy is that piece of compassion that recognizes that if we take incredible care of the person. Well, and it's also a curious thing to think about in terms of when, especially in Matthew, but when Jesus is talking to groups and crowds, and so you've got all those listening in, and when you're in an environment where the ruler, where the empire, where the imperial force that has control over you in ways that you are unable to control yourself, that just has more power that they can exert over you, also overhears. And that in the midst of that, those who are hearing things that may in some way help to weaken that force. So the juxtaposition of all that is really wonderful and refreshing especially right now. I can't think of how many people, it feels like countless people I've heard say sometime in the last few months of how powerless they feel. That the forces that have united to wreak havoc, the forces that have claimed violence as their right, racists claiming not to be racist, being indignant with being called racist. So I have issue with being called racist, but my racist behavior is not a problem. But this kind of slippery force is harder to deal with. It's harder to sort out, and it's easier for people to hide behind. So in the midst of that, we've got that happening. We've got people who hear those words that are hearing them going, this sounds impossible with all of this power around me. But people who also are hearing those words and asking the question, how am I called to do that right now with these incredible, powerful forces around me? And does that give me a window in? Are the words of the Beatitude of words of hope? Are they a rallying cry? And I would say for those sisters in Texas, that's exactly what they were. It took them right out into it. I imagine there was cost for them, emotional cost, spiritual cost, mental health cost, that all of those things. That it's not just, I think so often our acts of mercy are get a bag of groceries and leave them. And yes, do the people need a bag of groceries? Absolutely. But it is a completely different thing to call and say, what are your favorite foods? What do you need the most? Or can I take you to the store and shop with you and I will cover it at the end? That's a completely different compassionate act. I think we have gotten to a place where for us, an act of mercy is a fundraiser or it's a writing of a check. And those are important, absolutely important. The money is important. The financial support is important. I'm not knocking that. Something else happens though when we know people's names.
If we're called to be merciful in order that we may receive mercy, it implies that we all need it. We're certainly all broken and we're all, but I do wonder if it's easier. I say this perhaps because I think the grass is greener on the other side, whether it is in fact easier to be merciful if you have less to lose. What I see in churches that I have served and churches that I've observed and looking around me is we begin to feel like we have a lot more to lose all of a sudden. We begin to feel as if every decision we make is existential. It might possibly be the one that runs us out of business. Less willing to take the risks that might bring about corporal works of mercy, might bring more mercy into the world, bring more blessing into the world, because we feel we can't afford to do it. And I worry that what we're doing is we're making the prophecy fulfill itself. We're less kind, we're less generous, we're less willing to enact the abundance of God in the world, and therefore there is less of it, and therefore it turns out there really is less.
It could be. I do not, I don't believe COVID was sent so that God could sort out the Episcopal Church, but I do believe that God uses everything. That anything and everything that can be used for the good of God's people, God is going to use. And I think this is definitely being used in our churches and with our people. And I think we're in the midst of an incredibly rich time of reevaluation and wondering and experimentation in figuring out our identity. Who are we and what are we called to be? How are we to do that? It takes me 3 years to rotate through all of my churches. And so this year's churches I saw online, all of them. And I was really struck by two churches. So I meet with the church and then do the service, and then afterwards we meet as the whole congregation meets. This is all on Zoom, and I ask one question: "How are you doing?" And everybody gets to answer it their own way. Every single church, every single Sunday, people talked about how blessed they were by the community of faith, how much their faith life has expanded in this year, the ways that they have learned how to pray, how much Bible informed them in a way that it had never been before, that they simply didn't have time before, but now they had time to actually commit to a Bible study or commit to a faith group, that kind of thing. And then after that, I meet with the vestry. And after an hour of listening to all the many ways people feel blessed, not only by the church, but by God, recognizing that they had people who had been down with COVID that were well, or that people died and they were able to say goodbye to everybody. They were missing the funeral, but they knew that was coming, that kind of thing. They just talked about blessing after blessing, rediscovering families, rediscovering relationships, blessing after blessing. Then I meet with the vestries. And when I meet with the vestries, it's not for me to teach them anything. It is simply to be a resource. After 2 hours on Zoom, most people are tired. So I just ask them, how can I be a resource to you today? That throws every vestry, even though they know that's the question that's coming. So then I say, tell me what worries you. In almost, save two, in almost every call, except for those two, the first thing that worried them was the money. I don't know how we're going to make it because of the money. I'm just worried that people won't give. I don't know how our people are going to be able to afford to pledge. And I asked them if they were on the same call I was just on. And asked them, have they also talked with those people about where we are financially? And usually it's turned out they're not. All of this to let me get to the two. This is the important part of this story. Those two parishes found themselves. They found their calling in this year. One of them, it was through an expansive feeding program that kind of took over their whole town, but hosted in their church. They went from providing 200 meals a week to 10,000 a week. So it's not just that church, it's the whole town is involved. It's a big project, and they're providing the foods for schools and the kids that couldn't get their regular meals that way. So it's a lot happening. When I asked the vestry what were they worried about, they said, interestingly, we've always been worried, but we're the strongest we've ever been. Because they know what they're called to do and they're doing it. They have all of these relationships now because they are not doing kind of a sit down, give people food. They're handing food off. They know the people they're handing food off to. So those relationships have grown deeper. They at times pray for the people they're handing food off to. Those people have become friends. Same thing with the other church. They found their own ministry. And it really and truly has been being the place for prayer for the neighborhood, that they have a spot where people can put up prayers. And they pray for those prayers every week and update people on those prayers. And it was interesting that both vestries answered the question the same way. Actually, we're not worried. They both said, unbeknownst to each other, we're the strongest we've ever been.
Well, we're getting near the end of our time. And I'm very grateful. We are very grateful for the time that you've given us today. There's a lot here to chew on, and I hope people will take it away and find blessings in it. But I wonder if you would lead us out with Matthew 5, but also apparently also you'd like to do a reading of the 23rd Psalm. It would be a lovely thing for us to have as a takeaway for today, I think. So if you please.
Great. And I say the 23rd Psalm because the theme of mercy flows all throughout Scripture. And this is one that when I'm in a hospital room with someone who doesn't even know the Bible and sometimes are not even a Christian, if I start these words, they can finish them, and almost everyone knows that last verse. The Lord is my shepherd, therefore I lack nothing. He shall feed me in green pasture and lead me beside the waters of comfort. He shall convert my soul and bring me forth in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff comfort me. Thou shalt prepare a table before me in the presence of them that trouble me. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, and my cup shall be full. Surely thy loving kindness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And from Matthew's Gospel. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your, thank you
Nice
for your,
time with the two of you all.
yeah. We're either going to have to come to Newark or you're going to have to come to Newark or whatever. You know,
Absolutely.
that,
Absolutely. And it would have happened sooner if it hadn't been COVID.
Yeah, you know, it just, it just would be lovely.
We got a
to
lot
spend
of
some
catching
time.
up to do.
Thank you for traveling with Bishop Hughes and us today as we conversed about mercy and really explored some wonderful stories of mercy and how it is playing itself out in our world. Please share this episode with your friends and families and any who you may think will benefit from the Bishop's words and our questions of her. Next time we will join with a very good friend of ours, the very Reverend Dr. Gil Stafford. Gil is a former baseball coach, baseball player, college academician, and college president. Most recently, he has served as an Episcopal priest and the canon theologian for the diocese, and now with his spouse Kathy runs a wisdom school. He is one of the most powerful mystics that I know of, and you will surely benefit from your time with him as we discuss Blessed Are the Pure in Heart. Until next time, Godspeed with you, farewell, and blessings along the way.